I think we're off to a terrific start here. And let's just get right into the next session. This is Reimagining Money and Identity in Rural Contexts. And as I said, one of the things that we try to do with IMTFI is make sure that we're attentive to the rural and the remote. And there are people who were rural and remote and couldn't make it here today. So for this panel, we have one presenter who's going to be Skyping in to give his presentation, another whose presentation is going to be delivered with some assistance from Nate Coben, one of our grad students over here. Uthman Hassan has recorded his presentation from the middle of nowhere where he is right now, and also sent his PowerPoints, which apparently involved a 3-hour trek to find a place where there was both enough electricity and enough internet to get the thing uploaded. So we're very pleased that we've got his work. And our moderator, I'm very pleased to welcome Amol Jadhav, who's the Senior M-Agri Manager at the GSM Association. He leads the team and program partners in developing mobile agriculture consultancy support to mobile network operators across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And given that I think what he does is going to be very interesting to many of our researchers who aren't familiar with the M-Agri program or the GSM Association, I've given him the liberty to say a few words about what he does too, either at the beginning or the end, wherever you'd like. So let me just turn it over to Amol, and we'll get started with the next panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. I'll give just a quick background on our organization. So the GSM Association is the trade association for the mobile phone industry. So we represent about 800 or so mobile network operators around the world. So I'm very excited to be here today, and I'm particularly interested in one of the things that Bill mentioned earlier this morning about the goal about supporting the researchers in disseminating their findings more broadly. Representing the mobile phone industry, I could say that we don't do that so well, understanding consumers and doing that kind of research. So I'm interested in learning more about what you guys are finding and how we could apply some of that within our industry. So looking forward to hearing your presentations, connecting with you guys during the breaks. Right now, though, we do have 3 researchers giving their midterm updates. So yeah, I hope you guys can bear with us as we navigate through the rural technology divide. And so first up, we have Uthman Hassan, who has recorded his presentation, and Nate is going to play it for us. So yeah, please pay attention. I know it's difficult to pay attention without somebody here, so there will be a quiz at the end. So yeah, go ahead, Nate.
Distinguished panels, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it has already been an honor and a pleasure for me, as I am one of the awardees with the 5th IMTFI Research Fellowship. It is also a great honor and pleasure to say a few words about my research project entitled Pastoral Adaptation to Market Opportunities and the Changing Gender Roles among the AFAR in Ethiopia on this conference. Distinguished participants, please allow me to begin with a brief historical account. Before partitioned into Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, the AFAR had been engaging in mining, fishery, and commerce. Taking the advantage of the Red Sea, port of Tajura, and Ethiopia's caravan trade routes, they had been the major commercial actor who employed Maria Theresa, British sterling, the Italian lira, Arabs, and Indian coins until the end of the 9th century. A British diplomat who visited Ethiopia in the 1830s reported that the emperor was commercially dependent on the AFAR, and I quote, "The terror and abhorrence in which the Low Country and its attendant dangers have placed nearly the entire trade of Ali Yamba in the hands of the AFAR, were treated by the monarch with all deference and respect. The sovereign nevertheless took the precautions of keeping large stocks of the salt currency in case supplies were withheld." End of quotation. Though the AFAR had been the key player and the source of Ethiopia's primitive currency for centuries, they are now outside the dynamics of the market due to historically determined social circumstances. That is to say, the social order of the AFAR has practically been undergoing dramatic changes, which deserves sociological investigation. They are a grassroots response to failing institutions. Therefore, this study focuses on how the process of social change affect the lives of AFAR women engaging in the market using money and technology by examining or investigating the following objectives: aspects of state policies and institutional changes, their efforts and challenges they are encountering, the contributions they are making, the changes on occupational evaluation and social mobility. On this presentation, therefore, I will describe the research activities I have completed so far, the modification I have done, the remaining activities, and finally, my progress on the activity timeline. Distinguished participants. 11 persons participated in the research team. All of them have first or second degrees in social sciences, business, or agriculture. 5 or more AFAR users were contracted as translators, guides, and facilitators. Prior to data collection, the team was introduced by the PI about the objectives of the study and briefed in basic interviewing techniques. Therefore, keeping the 2 key milestones, I have been working hard, and the activities done and completed so far are reviewing documents, arranging logistics, travels and data collections, transcriptions, translations, categorization and preparation of progress reports. Distinguished participants, the overall implementation of the project was demanding and conducted in 3 stages. The first one was done for the purpose of making modifications and formulating relevant interview guides. For example, I had initially identified the target group to be the AFAR women associations, but presently they were either weakened or replaced by any form of enforced grouping locally known as 1 to 5. Thus the research design and the target group were modified. That is, instead of the women associations, it targeted those women who were involved or are still involving in women's groups or commercial enterprises. Data were also collected from relevant administrators, civic, religious leaders, tribal chiefs, venerable tribal sages, and academics. Distinguished participants, based on an interpretive approach, this study has employed in-depth and semi-structured interviews and small discussion groups. Some of the interviews were conducted in the homes of the informants, while most of them done in market centers, shops, and offices, either in Amharic or Afarifa. Due to the unbearable heats, they were conducted during early morning or late afternoon hours. In each evening, the team is to convene for recounting stories of informants and recollect their opinions. And finally, the major experience and narratives of informants were discussed with experts to elicit further insights. The informants were purposefully selected from both sexes. Though the interviewing process was straightforward, there were many challenges. For example, the informants were often reluctant to agree for interview schedule, declined to avail themselves for interview on the hours, overlapping living arrangements, and difficulty to organize focus group discussions as planned. They were resolved by using contact persons. Above all, my former students were crucial to the success of the data collection activities. We also had one interview from a household and discussions with small groups. Therefore, the final sample was 89 informants drawn from 3 generations. Accordingly, the oldest generation, aged from early 60s to late 80s, had been born and lived most of their lives in villages. 17 of them engaged in commerce and all boosted themselves on the sheer number of cattle and camels of their family of origin. For example, one informant aged 67 taken me into a mountainside near a small town called Asagita to show the 2 barns of his father, one for cattle and the other for gas, built by digging on the hillside. I have also observed and have pictures of similar structures on the foot of other mountains. The middle generation, aged from early 40s and late 50s, had been born and raised in villages. 10 of them have had some formal education, and 17 were employed or engaged in own businesses. Moreover, 4 of them were from female householders. This is exclusively urban phenomena unknown among the AFAR in villages. Finally, the youngest generation, aged between 25 to late 30s, and they have had access to urban market opportunities, so that 14 of them had degrees in different fields, all of them employed or own private businesses. 6 of them were also from female-headed households. Distinguished participants, though informants from the third generation tend to focus on different issues, all of them were concerned on dying pastoralism. Pastoral livelihoods are dying due to alienation, eviction by the state, and the expansionist post office plant, locally known as Wayani or Dita, meaning black, referring to its dark evergreen appearance. It has already become uncontrollable. Because of its health risks, the AFAR have stopped the consumption and marketing of the milk of their animals. All informants also reported that the cost of living is skyrocketing while the means of living are dying. They also perceived them as the major causes for social divisions, conflicts with neighboring communities, weakening tribal spirits and family values. And finally, chat addiction, which further constrained their commercial engagements. Most informants consider pastoralism as a sanctuary of social integrity, morality, and identity. Therefore, the AFAR are still engaging in system of production and exchange within the framework of tradition. As they produce for a variety of social reasons, they viewed wealth as more social and less private. Distinguished participants, the AFAR is also perhaps the only state where microfinance institutions are absent for security and geopolitical reasons. The 2 existing banks in the research towns demand tangible collaterals in which the AFAR do not possess, so that small businesses heavily rely on personal status and kinship ties. Despite this, they are actively engaging in commerce by facing such complications as striking distances, insecurity of roads, price fluctuations, and responsive institutions. Distinguished participants, all informants agreed that the traditional division of labor and occupational evaluation is generally changing. For example, formerly unmarketable tribal assets and products are becoming commodities, and the young are living on wages and salaries, compatible to the rules of the market and urban lifestyles. Though unrepresentative, money and technology are providing new opportunities and greater mobility. Above all, it was in the area of gender roles and relations that the majority, mostly males, felt that significant changes for the better had occurred, a view that cut across generations. Distinguished participants, the remaining activities in my research project are data analysis, write-up and revision, proofreading, and submitting the final report on June 2015. And therefore, I am on schedule to finalize the project by the original timeline. Finally, once again, I'm grateful to IMTFI for this opportunity, and you distinguished participants, thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thanks for your patience, guys. And so that was Hassan. Next, we have joining us via Skype or via conference call. Oh, via Skype, all right. Even better. So joining us via Skype, we have Prince Guma from Uganda. And let's see if it's coming up. That's a good sign so far.
Yes, hello.
Hi, friends.
Yes, how are you?
We're waiting for the video to show up.
Sure.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. We're going to pull up your slides right now, and as you give your presentation, just let me know when to change slides.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Prince Karakira Guma, and my presentation is about reimagining reality in mobile money times. And I'm focusing on three insights, which you will see as follows. First of all, I'll begin by outlining the presentation. I'll start by presenting the questions, the approach of the study, the data and methods, and then I'll also proceed to the three insights, including social life, sociality, and community, and lastly, rural identity, before finally concluding with a few questions about rural identity and authenticity. First off, my question was about how and what are the emergent mobile finance options shaping social life or groups and communities most at risk of rural identity and social exclusion. I was also concerned about what these finance mobile options are, but also about what forms of identity, of community, of lifestyle are emerging around mobile money products and services in geographically remote territories in southern Uganda. My approach is as follows in the next slide. Beyond the belief of rurality as static concept was very influential for my study because I did not conceive rurality as being static, but rather as being dynamic and also as being, ever changing. So it was very important for me to conceive reality as basically static, but also as a space that is ever changing and dynamic, but also very complex in nature. The other issue that I was mostly concerned about when I was doing this research was the need to avoid stamping rural residents with an otherness. And the question for me here was, if I intended to go into the field, how would I relate with the communities in a way that I'm not an outsider? And this was very important for me. And the strategy here was mostly to be part of the group, be part of the communities and of the rural people as well, and not to be judgmental in our analysis and that kind of thing. The other issue was avoiding a counterintuitive for Western trained mind. And I specifically thought that this was very important in that we sought to avoid Western conceptualizations of rurality because, uh, the rural itself is a very broad concept, and it varies from different contexts. So we thought that going into the field without necessarily having a specific definition of what rural entailed would be very important for the case of this study. But lastly, we also were very careful to figure out the totality of livelihoods, not basing on our ideas of what these livelihoods are, but mostly also from the perspective of the rural themselves. So we sought to analyze these issues, to look at their perspective from their eyes and from their perspectives and from their views rather than from a judgmental perspective. Next slide. The data and methods were basically interview method, which entailed the which entailed non-structured and semi-structured methods. And we also used the observation methods, although the observation method that we used was sort of different in that, according to these pictures, you see that we formed some kind of groups and introduced a few agents to the people and let the people discuss these issues amongst themselves with the agents, while the researchers were, among the groups at the same time observing, but also contributing where necessary. Then lastly, we also used the secondary sources, which were also very influential, especially for our conceptualizations and theorizations at the beginning of the study. Next slide, please. The three insights in this study were mostly social life, just to begin with, and sociality. And we figured that MNOs have specifically displayed enormous character by actively investing in social markets in the rural areas of the country. But also the systems of mobile money operates through a very basic system, such as the SMS, such as, most basic gadgets, including handsets and other stuff. And we thought that this was something that enhanced this social life and sociality in the rural. But what specifically stood out within the social life and sociality was how mobile money systems were providing a substitute for applications that already existed. For instance, the rural people already had ways of saving. They had ways of ensuring remittances, ways of making monetary payments, and ways of transferring money. But with the emergence of mobile money, these fixed and traditional methods were being replaced by these new and emergent applications. For saving, for instance, although mobile money was not specifically designed for saving money, but rather just transferring, it's in fact amazing how the rural were using this application to save and, to get into this whole culture of saving money, and also, ensuring remittances, also making monetary payments and paying, for instance, tuition and school fees and things like that, but also transferring money amongst themselves and also receiving money from the urban centers, from relatives and friends. Next slide, please. The other insight that was very imperative for this study was this whole aspect of community. One idea that I came across in the field was this whole framework of Ubuntu Bulamu, which is very specific to southern Uganda. It is basically an idea of community, of sociality, of philanthropic, relations with the community. And it was very important how the mobile money itself was in a way reinforcing this kind of relation in the rural areas. So much so that the the mobile money applications were turning out not to be specifically a non-threat to ingrained and these indigenous communal ideals. And we thought that this was very important in a way that the rural was conceived within these communities that we visited. Then also the other aspect that stood out was how mobile money allows a collective manner of operation in spaces of scarcity. And this aspect, for instance, was how, for instance, a whole community would have a single gadget, which gadget they would have to share amongst themselves. And because they have no power, they have to charge it separately, someone has to travel to an urban center and this mobile gadget has to be charged by a battery, these car batteries. So this whole aspect of operating the mobile phone, of using the mobile phone, was very communal in nature, and in a way it reinforced this whole idea of community within the rural areas. Next slide, which would be the next point on how, this is the fourth point on how the mobile money turned out to serve the socioeconomic, to serve as a socioeconomic tool. And this aspect was imperative, for instance, in how mobile money was used to balance social obligations with economic cooperation, because mobile money itself is a very social tool in nature, but how it was used as an economic tool was especially interesting in this case. But the other issue that we found to be imperative was how the system itself strengthened the village sociality and social networks, and also how useful it became in promoting microeconomic, enterprise and development, because most of the groups that we found in the rural areas, including, the circles, for instance, and the associations and women groups and other sort of groups, we found that most of these groups were facilitated by mobile money applications. They used the applications to, so much so that they allowed some form of solidarity, some dynamism within these groupings and within how they related to, they related among their members, and how they shared money in terms of need. Next slide. You see that, some of the pictures are just a portrayal of some rural areas and the areas that we visited. But most importantly is how mobile phones have increasingly conferred on village society characteristics of urban settings. So much so that a person in the rural area does not need to go to the urban setting to get a feel of what life is about. Because with these mobile money applications, people were able to use the system in a way that it provided the rural members with services that people in the urban areas were more accustomed to. And what was specifically interesting in this case is how this whole framework was introducing some kind of conception of, a different conception of space that was emerging in the rural. But what was also very interesting is how some rural residents claimed that this system was sometimes a danger to what they consider to be, a rural identity. They were not so open to, this changing nature of what they consider to be the rural, and they sometimes perceived this changing nature of the rural as a danger. And generally, the matrix of changing cultures, of identities, of changing behaviors was visibly apparent in the rural areas. And in the next slide, you'll see that the rural seem to have attained a new identity, even from the most basic ways of, the most basic practices like farming, like, the usual family chores and all that stuff. You could see that the rural is attaining a new form of identity. And mostly from the narratives that I was able to get from the field, they were so broad in that it's very hard to explain most of them by just generalizing. But I think it will make more sense when I'm finally done, and how in how I present the narratives, basing on how the rural conceive the rural areas, but also how they conceive such aspects as community, as sociality, and as rural identity. The other issue was about how uh, the businesses and institutions, especially the financial institutions, were first realizing the potential of mobile money and also trying to survive by adopting mobile money, about adopting the mobile money environment in the rural areas. And most of them were trying to introduce rural-friendly applications for different rural contexts. And I thought that this was very important for this particular study. In the next slide, I will conclude by saying that from the findings that I have so far and from the analysis that I'm trying to make, it's very clear that mobile money is integral for reimagining rurality. But then again, this raises more questions than answers. Questions like how does, what does this mean for the rural per se? But also, are these elements of rurality being preserved with the emergence of mobile money? Are they being changed or are they being recreated in an urban form? And if they are being recreated in an urban form, what does this mean for the rural space? Does this mean that that the mobile money will change how we feel about the rural space? Does this mean that the rural will eventually lose its authentic nature? Generally, what does this mean for rural authenticity? And of course, finally, the question that I'm more bothered about is if rural authenticity really matters. And as I conclude my presentation, I think that with time, as I get through with the analysis of my research, fieldwork and the research and the findings, I think that the question that will be most important is if rural authenticity matters and what mobile money means at a time like this. Yes, thank you.
Not sure if you could hear us, Prince Guma, but thank you for that presentation. Really interested in these final questions that you have around the impact of mobiles on the rural communities. We know that mobiles, and particularly mobile money, is disruptive, and in some cases it can strengthen some existing systems. In some cases it could, maybe have some unintended consequences. So really looking forward to those final conclusions later on. And hopefully you can stay on to take questions at the end. In the meantime, or immediately right now, we have our final presenter for the session. It's a team from Bolivia.
Yes, okay.
Maria and Oscar. Please join us in welcoming them.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for having us here. It is a pleasure to introduce to you our research. My name is Isabel Valderrama, and my co-researcher is sitting right there. His name is Oscar Rocavado. And the name of our research, as you can see here, is Handheld Wealth, Mobile Money, and Food Production in Rural Potosí. In Potosí being in Bolivia, of course. I would just like to tell you that as of right now, we have finished the data collection phase of our research, but we are still in the analysis phase. So what we're going to present to you now is based on our preliminary findings. Okay, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research area. We have chosen the Department of Potosí, and Potosí is the department with the lowest income in all of Bolivia. We chose the northern area of Potosí, as you can see there. We chose two municipalities, Chayanta and Urmiri, which are located in the province of Rafael Bustillo and Tomas Frias in the northern areas. You can see there. We chose those regions because they have very harsh climate. They're mostly agricultural areas, but the people there have to do what they can to cultivate the land, which is very harsh and not a lot grows. They mostly survive on cattle raising and potato farming. It's mostly subsistence farming, and we wanted to see if the mobile technologies have done anything to contribute towards them using new technologies to make more food grow, different kinds of food, and maybe produce on a higher scale where they can maybe have a small business. These areas are also very hard to reach by road because they are communities that are very far one from another. But they are close enough to mobile money points where they are somewhat accessible. The main purpose of our research was to find out what role does the adoption of the mobile money platform Tigo Money play in the productivity and implementation of new technologies for food production among the population that live in extreme poverty in northern Potosí. We decided to focus our research on Tigo and its product Tigo Money. Tigo, as many of you might know, is a Millicom brand which offers a range of digital services in 14 markets in Africa and Latin America. Tigo Money is very new. It was launched in Bolivia in 2013, so a lot of this research is new and very exploratory. The methodology we have chosen is mixed methods. We've chosen qualitative and quantitative methods. For the quantitative methods, we did surveys, 561 surveys in the 2 municipalities with Tigo users and non-Tigo users who were chosen at random in the communities. We also did structured interviews. We managed to collect 68 interviews so far. And these interviews were done only with Tigo Money users. And we also did interviews with key informants. For example, we interviewed 2 academic experts in the area. And we also had key informants in one in each municipality who introduced us to the local authorities and opened us up to the communities. And for the participatory observation, we spent time in the 2 municipalities, hoping to get a bit of access to the people. A lot of times people are not willing to talk a lot about their finances as if you ask them directly. So in order to overcome that, we spent some time in the communities just talking to the people, not really interviewing them, not really asking them straight, direct questions, and just kind of taking mental notes, maybe some pictures, but just kind of just talking to them so that they don't feel that they're being interviewed for any government agency or tax information or anything like that. So that's what we try to do. And the key informants helped a lot with that. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into the detail of some of the more relevant findings of the research so far. So first of all, we found that 20% of the respondents from the surveys were Tigo Money users. There is a higher percentage of users in Urmiri, and this is because Urmiri is closer to Potosí, which is the capital of the department. Now, Potosí is a commercial hub where people could go to for other things as well. There are 20 Tigo points in Potosí, which are open at various times of the day and various days of the week. So they have more of a choice as far as where to go. So I think that's why there are more users in Urmiri. Chayanta, on the other hand, is closest to Llayagua, which is a mining town, and there are only 2 Tigo points there. Llayagua is 30 minutes by road from some of the communities in Chayanta. There are some that are further away than that. But Urmiri is about an hour and a half away from Potosí, approximately. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes people walk. We also found that a lot of the Tigo points are located in the more commercial areas, as you can see from this picture. Some of them are also attached to formal banking institutions. Okay. First of all, we wanted to know how the introduction of a new mobile money platform transformed the spending, saving, and investing habits of the people in Urmiri and Chayanta. We found that if you ask them, like I said directly, like, do you invest? A lot of people say, I don't invest. I don't have a big business. I don't have a business. I only spend my personal things, the money that they receive. Now, we found through talking to them a little bit more that isn't necessarily true. we did see that a lot of Tigo Money users had actually begun saving for their future. For example, as you can see, the last person, she was saving for a big trip to Argentina so that she could move there and perhaps get a job. We also found that many people were saving for their kids' schools, to send their kids to university. A lot of them were actually in university, and they used the Tigo Money that was sent to them to go to university. There is a university in Chayanta where we found a lot of Tigo users. A lot of them also save for better feed for the livestock. And some of them even started small businesses, like going to Potosi and buying canned goods to sell in local market fairs. So I thought that was very interesting. Another question was about the general directionality of the flows. We saw that overwhelmingly a lot of the flows were urban to rural, from La Paz, Cochabamba, and El Alto. El Alto is one of the fastest growing cities in Bolivia. It's mainly a commercial hub. When there were rural to rural transfers, which did occur, they mostly took place in Urmiri, and they occur from the Chapare region, which is the coca region, coca producing region in Bolivia, and they were being sent from there to Urmiri. So we also asked ourselves which segment of the population is more likely to adopt this mobile technology, and if this adoption was gendered in any way. We found that yes, it is actually more females that use Tigo Money, and ages 40 to 49. 60% of the users we found who fell into this category. As you can see from this graph, there aren't a lot of people in general that fall into the 30 to 39 age range. We saw that this is due to internal migration from the communities to the cities. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of internal migration to key areas such as La Paz, El Alto, and Santa Cruz, and also to mining towns such as La Yagua and Uyuni. This leaves a lot of young and older people in the communities, mostly women, because it is the men that tend to migrate the most, leaving their families behind and sending them money via Tigo Money. This creates a very strong link between urban and rural areas. This migration pattern may also explain why it is women 40 to 49 that are more likely to use Tigo Money, because these women, besides having husbands, they also have sons or daughters in the main hubs who also introduced them to the service, because at first we figured it would be the younger people who would be more likely to use the service, but as we found, it is 40 to 49, but a lot of them were introduced to the service by their younger sons or daughters. We also wanted to know if there was any hesitation from the population to participate or to engage in these technologies, and we found that no. Most of them are indifferent, but they are okay with adopting the technology if they need it. The people that say not to use the technologies because they don't need it, because they don't have any family members in any other parts of the country, or because they are merchants who go to the towns themselves and just pick up the money themselves. So if they need it, they will use it. And that's what we found. They rather use Tigo Money than a formal banking institution because it requires less paperwork, less time, and they can send even other family members to pick it up in their name. So there is less of a formal transaction, which people in the rural areas tend to like. So in regards to our main question, which I stated at the beginning, we found that Tigo Money does not yet play a central role in the implementation of new agricultural technologies. But as I said, it is still pretty new. So it has been expanding and rapidly growing. So we did see some cases of people purchasing sprinkler systems for their crops, buying different and better food for their livestock. Although there is not a wider variety of crops, because like I said, the ground is not very fertile. They do invest in greenhouses at times, and they are able to grow lettuce, kale, and cabbage. Okay. Other findings that we thought were a bit interesting. People don't always have access to Tigo they don't have reception for Tigo. So a lot of them actually don't use a Tigo cell phone. They'll use an Intel cell phone, which Intel is the government provider, and it is required by law to provide service to every single citizen in Bolivia. So what they do is they'll have an Intel cell phone, and they'll get a text message from their family members letting them know that there is money for them waiting at a Tigo point. So that was pretty cool. A pretty cool way in which people get access to this service. People who have an extreme lack of access to Tigo points, maybe due to time constraints, also have creative ways to access the service. For example, there is a case of a lady in Potosí who works at a Tigo point and lives in Chayanta. She collects the money for everyone in the community and goes back to the community once a week and distributes the money. Now, she's very well trusted, and she gets a small stipend for doing the service to the people. Also, we thought it was really interesting, the strong relation between internal migration and mobile banking. Okay, as a conclusion, we found out overall that people are not distrustful of new technologies. They're willing to adopt them if they believe it can play a role in improving their lives. And they will not adopt a technology they don't need, but quick and better access to cash is always welcome in these faraway parts of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. So we have time for a few questions and maybe a quick comment. Great. So we have our two research teams, Bolivia and Uganda, are both available for questions. I might take the first question if there's no hand. Okay, we do have a hand. All right. So go ahead. Please introduce yourself and give your question, please.
Sure. I'm Jaime Ramos from Peruvian Institute of Peruvian Studies. I have a question for you. I want to know if how long that mobile phones have been using in these areas, and also if you find some transactions made from rural areas to urban areas. And the last one. And what are the cultural boundaries that you have found in these communities to use the mobile phone as a useful tool for improving living conditions?
Thank you for your question. Okay, as for the first question, which was the first mobile money technology was actually Tigo. Before that, people used Prodem, which is a bank that was found in most rural areas. And again, that's a sort of a formal banking institution that people used. Tigo Money was the first system of this kind to break into the rural areas, and it's been going on since 2013, January. So it's fairly new. For the rural to urban transactions, we found one case, and it was a lady who received and sent. So she received from urban areas, and she sent the money back to another community. And that was the only case we found of that. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
The cultural boundaries that you have found in this using the mobile phone.
Well, a lot of people in Bolivia have cell phones, have had cell phones for a while now. 93 of 100 people have a cell phone. So they don't really need any specific smartphones or anything like that. Anything really, really simple phone. Now Tigo has made it so that they don't even need a cell phone or a Tigo phone. The only thing that we need is a really simple Entel phone, get a text message to get to a Tigo point. We haven't found any cultural boundaries. Even the older people do accept it. Really older people don't, because they just don't, they don't use cell phones, so that would be like, I guess an age gap more than a cultural boundary. But other than that, no, I mean, they are very willing to accept something that will help them gain access to cash.
But it's easy take a phone in Bolivia. The cost is $20 with a line. You can talk with $1 for a month, maybe. It depends. It's prepay. Everybody now take a phone because it's
Next question.
Your choice. Okay. I saw her hand first.
You sure? Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question's for the team from Bolivia. My name's Jamila Welch from the Institute for Business in the Global Context at Tufts University. And I actually wondered, you mentioned a couple of behaviors that you said were relatively new uses of the mobile money, including saving for a new business and just saving in general. And I wondered kind of what were the barriers to those behaviors ahead of time? Were people saving anyway, and how were they saving? Or was this kind of new behavior, wanting to open a business now? Sorry, I kind of conflated those two.
Thank you for your question. I would just like to reply with a quote that I got. It was, now that I get money, I have enough to save, which describes a lot of the situations that these people had. Before, they would only eat what they grew, and sometimes they sold a bit on the weekly market maybe. They didn't have enough to save. So now they get extra money from their relatives who are in the city, or maybe they have more frequent access to cash, and they are able to save more, and they are able to spend more as they get the money. So a lot of these behaviors are new to them. Saving, definitely. Before, they didn't have enough to even do that. So this new technology has opened them up to saving.
Hi, thank you to our colleagues from all the different parts of the world for the excellent presentations. My name is Dunge Kiti, and I'm from Kenya, but based in New York. My question is actually for our colleague from Uganda. I was curious in your discussion about rurality. What are some of the challenges that you face in Uganda? I mean, when you think about rural technology or technology in the rural areas, there's a lot of, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's electricity that sometimes we take for granted in urban areas. So what are some of the challenges that you face that can make this, address this issue of rurality being authentic? And then for my colleagues from Bolivia, real quickly, I was curious about the gap. Having done a little bit of work in Bolivia, we found that migration was also international. So a lot of Bolivians were moving from Bolivia to Spain, other places for work. I'm curious whether that links into your gap that you saw there, and whether there's any use of this technology to bring back remittances into Bolivia and some of those, so I'm just curious.
Yes, I did. Okay. About the challenges with regards to rurality and authenticity in my country, well, that's pretty much, it's a very complex question right now, and it has more to do with how rurality is conceived, or how rurality has been conceived over the years. And it also has to do with how rurality, or how the rural context or identity is at the moment with the emergence of mobile money technologies. But this is pretty much very complex. And at first I thought that my study would be very simple, you know, because when I was trying to write my proposal and design methods for my fieldwork, I sought to implement, you know, very, a very simple methodological framework. But then at the point at which you have all this data from the field, you realize that actually there's there is so much of narrative that you do have, and there's so much to be conceived, there's so much to be theorized about this idea of rurality and what rurality is at the moment, you know, and how issues of contemporaneity, how issues of identity, how issues of authenticity all cut across to define the rural as it is right now, makes it very complex. I think that the major challenge right now, the fact that the rural at this point is not necessarily defined, the fact that the rural itself, just like an urban context, has become so conflated with so many influences, even from the global, makes this, aspect very complex at the present. And I think that this is the biggest challenge right now. The fact that the rural is losing its identity, the fact that the rural is being changed into some different form, the fact that right now I'm researching about reimagining rurality in times of mobile money, I think that this is why the challenge is. And I think that this is an area that requires a lot of more research with regards to how the rural is conceived in the global south or Africa per se, or in my country, Uganda, for instance. I think that there is plenty of room to research about how the mobile phones, about how even the smartphones, I think 50 years from now, there'll be more smartphones in rural areas, and how these will influence rural areas, how they will shape rural dynamics, and how they'll make the rural areas more fluid and dynamic in context, will make this whole definition of rurality even more complex. So for me, basically, I think that the challenge right now is or has to do with this whole identity of rurality with the emergence of mobile money technologies.
Before we give the floor to Isabel and Oscar to address the question about international migration, I do want to touch on that topic briefly, in that the Mozilla Foundation is doing work around local content or user-generated content, which can support strengthening some of these issues around the rural areas losing identity. We could capture the rural way of life through rich media content, and if there's a way to maintain or support that, then yeah, it might lessen the unintended consequences that mobiles might have of causing some loss in identity. So then there's also a question for Isabel and Oscar around international migration.
For your question, we did encounter many households with people who had gone abroad. We did. Now, the Tigo Money service is only national as of right now, but we did talk to some families with relatives who had gone abroad, who had come back with money, who had gone back to the city, lived in cities such as La Paz or Santa Cruz, and did send money back. So in that sense, yes. International migration has always been a very important topic in Bolivia, and it continues to be. So it is very present, and it is very likely that that gap is also because of international.
We have time for a few more questions. I saw one pop up. Oh, okay, we already have one queued up. Yeah.
Hi.
Go ahead, please.
I'm Caroline Schuster at the Australian National University, and I have a question that I think might touch on both presentations. My question is about the relationship between mobile money access points and the rural communities that you're studying. A big part of, especially your story, was about traversing those distances to go pick up the money. So I wonder if you might expand upon that and tell us a bit more. So in the last session, I was really struck by the idea that mobile money can enable discretion, right? You can sort of hide what you're doing a bit in order to keep that private, as opposed to these big public displays of wealth. And that struck me as maybe being in tension with these kind of having to go off to go pick up your money, and then you come back and everybody knows that you've got money in your pocket, right? So I wonder if you might say something about the pressures on that money, especially in tension with this goal of saving money and being able to put some away. So how that distance is kind of negotiated by the people who are picking up money. And Prince, I can ask you also to maybe reflect a bit on how the mobile money points are penetrating the market in rural areas, how people are negotiating those distances. Is it difficult to kind of access these points? And then what does that make visible, kind of going to these points and accessing money? especially in these rural spaces where face-to-face interactions and information flows are mediated in particular ways. Thanks.
As far as the distance thing, Tigo Money has brought a bit more access to these communities, but as I mentioned in the presentation, it is still very, very difficult for a lot of these people to access Tigo Money. Yes, they are closer. It is a lot easier than going back to a formal banking institution and doing the line and the paperwork and having all the forms of ID and the minimum it requires and all of that. But it is still very, very difficult. And a lot of the people we interviewed and surveyed did mention that being one of the problems. It's still very far. It's still very difficult. Tigo Money is growing. Its presence is growing. So it is getting easier. But the isolation of these communities, even from each other, and the fact that there is so few people in Bolivia makes it really hard to, bridge that distance. But hopefully with time, that'll get better. And also that we hope that, the research shows that people are open to adopting these technologies. And maybe that will reach these companies. And even maybe Entel could implement something like that is subsidized by the government so that, they don't have to pay these. Or maybe a mobile point that could go from community to community once a week. Things like that. We hope that we'll bridge the gap. The other question, I'm sorry, the second, is that it?
Whether there's pressures on savings because of that, if people know that you arrive with money in your pocket, there's pressure to share it.
We actually haven't touched on that at all, but it's a really good, I'm gonna make a note on that. Thank you.
And Prince, did you get the question?
I hope I got it right, but was the question about the scarcity of mobile money agents?
Yeah, I just wondered what it was like.
Okay. Yeah, actually, this is a very interesting question. But the thing is, when you go to a community and you see, school kids walking 20 kilometers or, let's say 10 kilometers every morning, to go to school, it, makes you rethink about this whole idea of scarcity in the rural. I mean, scarcity is not really a new thing in the rural areas in Africa, but somehow rural residents find a way of managing the little resources that they do have. And, it's true that, mobile money agents are scarce. It's true that you won't find lots of, mobile money agents, dispersed in different localities. But despite this reality, there's a way that rural communities find a way of managing the little resources available. And when I gave an example of the mobile phones, the fact that, just a single community of about, let's say an extended family within a geographical scope of about, 10 kilometers wide or something like that. The fact that this whole community can use just one gadget just says a lot about how this whole aspect of sociality and community enables, the rural lifestyles and enables the rural to manage within realities of scarcity. So while it's true that they are scarce agents, while it's true that you won't find many mobile money agents in the villages and people have to walk to the urban centers, for a person in the rural, it's not really a new thing. And somehow they get a way of managing the little resources that they do have, just like they've always have. And I personally did not find that as a problem, because mobile money was this kind of asset that the rural people used, without many complaints. I hardly had any complaints about mobile money, with regards to risk of, the scarcity of mobile money agents. You didn't hear lots of such, issues coming out from the rural residents themselves. So perhaps rural residents find a way of dealing with these realities, and in a way that someone else probably would not be able to understand. Yes.
Thank you. I think we have our next question ready.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So I'm Enrique Seira from Mexico. I have a question for Tigo, for the Tigo project, just about the aim of the project, and is the aim to describe who adopts Tigo, or is the aim to measure what's the effect of adopting Tigo?
Hello, thank you for your question. The aim of this project was mostly exploratory. Like we said, Tigo mobile money services are brand new in Bolivia, relatively new. There has been no prior research done in this area. We wanted to sort of find out as much as we could. Who adopts this technology? Are they open to are they adopting it? We weren't sure if maybe one person in each community was going to say, yeah, I use it. It was basically to see if people are open to it. If they're not, why not? And who was more willing to adopt it. If there were some populations versus others, age ranges, gender.
Yeah. And in the TV, the commercials are aggressive. Tigo is aggressive company because he wants to sell his products. No, now it's growing up very, very, very quickly.
Thank you. Our friend from Tanzania, please.
Thank you. My name is Sostenes Kewe. I run the Financial Sector Deepening Trust in Tanzania. I have 3 sets of questions. The first one is to my colleague in Uganda, and the first 2. The third one is to my friends from Bolivia. In the case of mobile money penetration in Uganda, talking about the rurality, what do you think is driving the uptake of mobile financial services? And I'm asking this question because before we talk about people using financial services, they have to be accessible in the first place. And therefore, I want to really understand, in the Ugandan case, what is driving the uptake of mobile money so that we can discuss about the rurality issue. And for me, the rural is just geography. I would like to understand more about the ecosystem. This is the second question. How does the ecosystem really drive the whole issue of mobile money and therefore, in this case, financial services? And I'm saying this because I've heard that what mobile money does is push money from urban areas to rural areas. But I think there could be more to that. Have you seen trends in such a way that there is much more than sending and receiving? What about storing value? Savings we talk about here. But I think what is crucial will be whether people are actually replacing cash with e-value. And that really requires us to understand the ecosystem. So in the Ugandan case, how are these playing off? Going to my colleagues in Bolivia, would you cite some impacts on mobile money or digital finance? And in this case, since you have talked about that area being quite difficult, the surroundings, the environment in which these people live is quite hard. What would you say about the initial impacts on how they are managing shocks? Is mobile money helping them to do that? You talked about enterprise growth in your presentation. How do you capture this to show that there is impact out of mobile money? so that maybe there's income increment or growth in terms of enterprise. If there's an increase in productivity, how is that happening? And I'm asking that from the social cohesion point of view, how do you see this actually playing off when you talk about empowerment? That people, you have talked about, wealth in the hand, right? So, and I guess I want to bring the gender issue here. Are the women feeling that empowered when they have their asset in their hand, in their phone, whether it's a saving or something like that? And I think the last one I would like to throw to everyone in this room is the cost of doing this. Is that efficient enough? When we talk about mobile money, is the cost really, commensurate with what people expect, and whether they can really use more of these financial services at the costs that are going today?
So there were quite a few questions there, and there are plenty of other hands in the room. So Prince Guma, if you could go first, and keep in mind that we're a little bit tight for time, but there's plenty more questions. So please go ahead if you got those questions, Prince.
Okay, thanks for the questions. Very insightful questions. And I specifically won't answer the one on ecosystem because my scope did not, was not that broad, because when I set out to make the study, I adopted a small scale approach, and I was mostly interested in an ethnographic way of reimagining rurality in time, in the times of mobile money or in the mobile money age. And basically the ecosystem and how this mobile money operates was not, my interest right from the beginning, but rather just to define the rurality, how to reimagine rurality in the Ugandan context within the times of mobile money. And with regards to the uptake of mobile money and what the forces are that are driving mobile money in my country, for instance, first off, I think that the system of mobile money operates through texts, through an SMS, as the Ugandans call it, and it also functions on the most basic gadget and in the most basic fashion. And for me, I think that this is something that makes the application itself more accessible to people in the rural. The fact that you don't need more these complex smartphones and all that kind of stuff to register to mobile money to be able to use its services and facilities, such as saving, like receiving remittances, like making mobile payments and transferring money. Its simplicity allows it to operate within rural contexts. There is not so much science, involved for someone to use its applications. And I think that that's the most driving force that makes it, rural friendly in, context of the global South. I think that for me, that's the most driving force that has made mobile money what it is right now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prince. Isabel, Oscar? Question about citing impact.
I'm going to try to touch on all your questions quickly. As for the managing shocks, we have seen people who have answered, now I can save for a rainy day. So, as for increased production, an increase in production for people who are setting up small businesses, we're still analyzing that. So I couldn't give you an answer on that just yet, but we do have some data to help us answer that later on in the paper. Same for female empowerment. We did ask the women, we did ask everybody, all Tigo users, who makes the financial decisions in your household? And a lot of the women, from what I've seen from preliminary data analysis, have answered, I do, or me and my husband. All the men actually say, my wife. So I don't know if they're just saying that or if really they're feeling empowered. So we'll look into that as well. As for the cost of the service, we think it's cheap. It's about 29 cents for up to $4, and it's about $7 for 260, and person to person is about 0.02 cents for like about $1.50. But to them, they're very low income people. So it is expensive to them. To them, anything is expensive. Any extra expense is a lot. If you go to a banking institution and you're not a member of the bank, you could do a transfer, but they'll charge you a lot more. It would be free, but then again, you have to have an account. So that's something you have to balance out.
Thank you. So we have one more question from Madame in the blue. Any others that we should try to fit in before we break? All right, Madame, please.
Thank you. I'm Dorothy from Uganda, and I have a question for Prince and maybe a contribution to his study. Given the findings that you have, the preliminary findings that you have right now, many of our people in rural areas are deep-seated in their cultural beliefs and traditions. I would like to know, how is the mobile money services changing their cultural values, the social or cultural values? I don't know if you have it. And I would still suggest it's better to do a comparison of the communities before the mobile money service and the current ones. Because when you look at our people, when you're sending money in rural areas, they have this belief, we are cheated by these service providers. Why don't you do a comparison of mobile money before in that community and the current situation? It will give you the attitude and the values that they have in using the services. Thank you.
Did you get the question, Prince?
Yes, okay. Okay.
So
Yes.
the question was about how the rural folks are pretty deep-seated and how mobile is kind of changing that.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Dorothy, for your question. This is not a question that I can answer right now, because right now I think I have more questions with regards to these specific questions, like what mobile money means for the rurality as we know it, what it means for rural authenticity, if the rural is being preserved, or if it's being changed, or if it's being recreated in a different form. I think that these are questions, first of all, they are very broad questions, and these are questions that can only be met by, through further studies, not specifically this study as such, because they're very broad questions, like I said, but they're also very interesting questions and very intriguing questions, and they're the kinds of questions that needs to be engaged more in conferences like this and in workshops and other scholarly engagements. But for as far as this study is concerned, I think that by the end of this study, by the time that I'm done with the analysis of the study, I'll probably have more questions than answers with regards to, with regards to rural identity, or rural context or rurality per se. So I can't really give a straight answer to that, but instead provide more questions with regards to that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that one is a tough question, important one, and maybe something that we could discuss over lunch coming up. So I might jump in with two quick questions, and then we'll see if we have time for a few more before we break for lunch. So one question for Isabel and Oscar. So your midterm findings, or your midterm kind of conclusion, was that the Tigo money didn't really play a meaningful role in food production and improving yields and those kind of things for rural farmers. What do you think it would take for Tigo money to impact food production and to impact yields and livelihoods? And I understand you guys are speculating here because, yeah.
Well, I think it would take a lot of the people who have adopted new technologies, from what we've observed, it has been through subsidized farming technologies through NGOs and things like that. So, for example, someone would pay $1,000 or something like that, and the government or an NGO would put in the other 1,000, and they were able to buy a new technology through that. Maybe more programs like that, because what they get sent through Tigo Money is just not enough to purchase these technologies, which are expensive. So maybe more government subsidized programs, more NGO programs, things like that, where people could purchase new farming technology at a cheaper price, and also even learn about these new technologies, because a lot of people don't know about them as well. So they get the money, save the money, and then just keep doing what they're doing. Information is always key, so maybe that.
One thing that my organization is looking at is specific mobile money use cases for the agricultural sector. So right now, Tigo Money is a mobile money service for rural, urban, for taxi drivers, farmers, whoever. We're trying to look at, are there some specific use cases for agriculture? Who knows? We'll see. Next question that I had for Prince Guma is, first of all, where are you? What time is it over there? And then second question is, you mentioned that MNOs were making meaningful investment in the social sector. Wonder if you could elaborate on that. I might disagree with you, or I'm not quite too sure if I agree or not. So would be great to hear a bit more about what you've seen.
I'm sorry, I would like to hear the second question.
Second question is about one of your comments around how you've seen MNOs, the network operators, make investments in the social market. Would be good to see what you've seen. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm in Frankfurt, and it's 23 hours, so it's good night from Frankfurt. Or let's say good evening, that is. I know it's morning in California. And I really miss being there. I wish I was there. There was some technical issues that couldn't enable me to come to California. But with regards to the second question, there are different social organizations and social groupings and associations that have always been in the rural areas, especially women associations. But also I got to meet a few groups that involve men. And these were mostly groups that used mobile money applications in a way that made them, to be more fluid and also dynamic. But also, it was interesting how other sorts of companies or businesses, even schools, were adopting these applications in a way that enabled social relations, but also a communitarian approach to dealing with economic issues. And for me and the researchers, that was very interesting, because mobile money in a way was providing a different approach to fixed and traditional approaches of doing things in the rural. And also what was interesting is that the rural residents did not necessarily adopt mobile money applications just for the sake of their simplicity or their accessibility, but they only adopted these applications only after they were sure that they provided real alternatives and real solutions to real problems of the rural. And this for me was very interesting because unlike in the urban areas where someone will adopt a certain method of doing things just out of class affiliation or any other reason, for the rural it's just out of need and out of probably confirmation from friends or others that this application that they are adopting actually deals or provides solutions to real problems and provides real solutions to real rural problems. But generally, with regards to what MNOs are doing in the rural, it's about how the businesses and how institutions like schools and the circles and other social groupings and associations were using mobile money applications, and also how they were engaging telecom companies to provide better services to the people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I see that it's about 12:30. Do we have time for one last questions, or should we adjourn? If there's any last burning questions that want to get into our lunch hour, please, please feel free. No, seriously, if there are questions, we do have time. I don't want to discourage. Okay, last one in the front.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. I noticed in one of your slides, I'm Anna from Colombia. In one of your slides, I noticed that the uptake of this Tigo technology, the range jumped a lot to women in 40s and 50s. I'm assuming what happens is that the husbands are the ones that are back in the main cities and sending money back. So when we're talking about the impact on agriculture, aren't the men the ones that were usually in the fields dealing with crops? Is it going to change the aspect of industry, do you think? I mean, in terms of if it's women who are now receiving the money, are they investing again in the fields? Or, for example, on textiles or things like that? That's basically.
Thank you for your question. The women do work in the fields as well, of course. But as you mentioned, they might not be doing the exact same thing that the men do. They might not be able to. The sons do help. And there is still a large number of young males present in the fields. But there is a lot of women who are taking up, who are doing selling textiles. There's a lot of women who go to Potosi to acquire canned goods and things like that to sell on markets. So yes, in that sense, there is a lot of women who are taking up small businesses and entrepreneurship. So.
Thank you. Before we break for lunch, please join me in thanking our research teams, Isabel and Oscar from Bolivia, Prince from Uganda.